Good morning. Thank you, Tim. Good morning, Sydney. How's everybody doing? Caffeinated? Doing okay? It's been maybe a year since I believe I was back, since I was last in Sydney. So I'm very excited to be back. I think I saw a lot of you the last time I was actually in town doing Puppet Camp Sydney. And I'm pretty happy to be back, really for a whole host of reasons, but two in particular. I think number one, well, I have a lot of puppet-related stuff I'm anxious to talk to you all about. And number two, the last time I was here, a seagull swooped in and stole the halloumi off of my dinner plate and then just flew off with it. Like, just flew off. I didn't even take a bite. And if you remember my talk from last year, I vowed revenge. Well, it's been 12 months. I'm back, birds. And there's some much-deserved retribution I think is going to happen. So as much as I would love to regale you with the tales of what I can only anticipate is a Tarantino-esque revenge spree of me versus these avian cheese-stealing jerks, I'm still in the planning phase, so it hasn't quite happened yet. So instead, maybe I'll just stick to the ones and zeros, and we can talk about tech for the rest of the time. Okay, so Puppet. Hopefully you've all heard of us. Otherwise, you're probably in the wrong room. Puppet, I think, I've been working for Puppet for quite some time, maybe about 7 or 8 years. And I think at this point, things were very different when I started with the company. But I think now, in 2018, safe to say, Puppet is very much synonymous with configuration management. However, automation goes far beyond just configuration management. And accordingly, Puppet the company has also had to go beyond just configuration management. So last year at our conference, we had, in the last year, we went from having one product, which is really Puppet Enterprise, to having multiple different product lines, a portfolio of things. Again, all along the lines of trying to go beyond just what configuration management does. We've, as a result of that, in order to actually do this well and correctly, we had to move from shipping twice a year to shipping 2 times a month. And I think that's just the natural consequence of having more stuff that people want on different cadences. Of course, this is not including all the builds that we ship internally, stuff that we do to the Forge, but actual product launches and things like that we release out to the wild. So if you kind of look at the numbers, you can distill it down to us ultimately doing more in less time. And we don't really plan on stopping anytime soon, mostly because, well, all of you, users, customers, and the market don't really give us the opportunity to slow down or stop, right? So that idea of being pressured to do more in a smaller amount of time, maybe with fewer resources, but with a higher bar of quality that has no sign of stopping or reducing anytime soon, maybe that sounds like a familiar story to a lot of you. And it should, because I think that's the classic DevOps journey. Right? Like this idea of how do we somehow deal with this tide of incoming requirements and figure out the right way to actually produce stuff in the quality that we want, on the timelines that we need, in a way without driving ourselves insane due to complexity or stress. So we're on that journey the same way that I anticipate a lot of you are also on. We might be in different places, but it's the same journey nonetheless. So we have a lot of conversations with people. We had a lot of conversations when we came out with the State of DevOps report, interviewing folks, and just talking with users and customers. And what I've found is that overall, a couple of key consistent themes always seem to bubble up to the top. So first is a theme about speed. And that's really ultimately, how can I get value faster and shrink how long it takes me to automate stuff? Hopefully that makes sense, but if you think about it, if it takes you 2 years to automate something that normally takes you a week to do manually, if you do the math, the ROI might not necessarily be there. So there's this constant desire to shrink how much time it takes to actually get automation in place. You get better return on investment that way. 2, scale. Oftentimes when people say scale, they think immediately the technological aspects of it, just volume and size. But I really mean this in 2 senses. First is in human terms, which is how do I scale the success I had automating something from maybe a set of individuals or a single team working on a single product to instead spanning a much greater part of the org, right? Because the more people that are involved in this, kind of the more impact any automation you do has. So that's good stuff. But not just in human terms, but also in technological terms, which when I say that, what I mean is taking things where maybe you have one team automating stuff for a particular use case on a single product or a single service in a single data center in a single region. How do you take that and actually expand it out to cover the entire estate that you have to deal with? 3, how do I take advantage of what I would call transformative technologies? And so for things like that, I'm thinking really containerization and the advent of cloud-native architectures. Tim spoke a little bit about that earlier. How do I take advantage of that stuff while simultaneously bringing all of my developers and my operations personnel along for that journey? You don't want to leave that stuff behind. That's a lot of good expertise that understands how the business works. You need to make sure that they come along as you go through these sort of re-architectures, re-implementations, and take on new greenfield projects using vastly different technological components and architectures under the hood. And how do you get the most advantage and leverage out of automation that you probably already have? You've already automated a bunch of stuff. How do you translate that into this new world? It's a fair question. People are worried about it. And lastly, measurement. So, we're pretty heavy into DevOps, and a big part of DevOps is measuring things. And I think ultimately this manifests itself in my conversations with people as a very simple statement, which is any of the stuff I'm doing actually helping? You should be skeptical. I think you should absolutely be skeptical. But does any of this stuff actually matter? The practices we're putting in place, the automation that I'm rolling out, personnel changes, organizational changes, does any of that stuff actually help? Like really, does it actually help? How do we know? And it's important to measure that. So 4 challenges, and what I'm here to talk to you about is how I want to help you with all of them. So hopefully you believe me when I say that. And I want to show you how. So how do we do this? Let's rewind a little bit and talk about maybe the portfolio of some of the stuff that we've got. And I'll kind of talk about how they relate to each other, and then we can go into sort of the newer announcements that we have. So last year, we introduced Puppet Bolt, which is our open source task runner. So what Bolt does is it kind of is a way of letting you execute kind of ad hoc commands, ad hoc tasks across your entire fleet, thousands of systems. You could do that all remotely. You don't need to have a server. You don't need to have a persistent daemon running on any of the targets. So it's a really good way of doing kind of ad hoc systems management tasks as a way to being complementary to Puppet's traditional sort of desired state view of the universe, right? If you haven't tried Bolt, well, you should for a couple of reasons. Number one is it's extremely sort of compact and reasonable to get started with. It's really easy to get started. You can just run a single command on most platforms and get it actually up and running. Number 2 is it's really easy kind of intellectually to get started with. You can start really, really simple. And lastly, it's just awesome. I think if you ever interact with anyone that fires up if you've ever fired up a terminal window and typed in a line of code and hit enter, first of all, you're doing infrastructure as code. Maybe you didn't think about it, but you're writing a program. Your program is just 1 line long, and you didn't save it. You just hit enter instead of putting it in a file. But that is code, and because that's code, and because we believe in infrastructure as code, I want to give you ways of taking the stuff that you're already running and doing that at scale, broadly. And that's what Bolt is already about. So what Bolt lets you do is you can take something as simple as just a one-liner that you've typed in, and you can propagate that all throughout your entire infrastructure at scale. That's pretty nice. You can take that and you can start stitching commands together. You can put them into a script, or like many people I talk to, chances are there's a directory somewhere on someone's laptop that contains a bunch of scripts that you're already using to manage, maintain, do forensic analysis, debug, all kinds of stuff. Why rewrite that? That's dumb. Instead, I should let you leverage the scripts that you've already got, only do it at scale, concurrently, safely, with all the reporting and stuff like that that you would expect from a tool that Puppet would make. You can take those scripts and you can extract out the bits that are hard-coded and lightly parameterize it. And suddenly you now have something that maybe only worked for one engineer on their own laptop against their own view of what a system is like. And now suddenly you have something that's shareable and reusable across multiple teams. That's what we call a task. You can put those inside of Puppet modules. You can upload them to the Forge. You can share them, which is great. So now suddenly you take stuff that might have been locked up in one person's brain or in one person's bash history or in one person's directory on a laptop, and now you could actually communicate that to other people inside of your org and throughout planet Earth, which is great. And then lastly, you can take all of those tasks, all those commands, all those scripts, and you can sequence them together in a precise way that allows you to actually orchestrate more interesting, novel things. If you want to deploy some complicated software, you want to do an upgrade, you want to migrate some things, oftentimes those tasks need to require a certain amount of sequencing. Do this over here, then do this, then do that, then go back over here and turn this thing back on again. We should make that easy, and we should make that powerful. So you can start simple and go all the way up to something more interesting. When you're ready to expand some of your kind of automation ambitions beyond Bolt, and you want to make that start encompassing more teams, well, that's the sweet spot for Puppet Enterprise. So Puppet Enterprise will let you leverage all of the stuff that you've done inside of Bolt. You can reuse all the tasks and everything like that you've already built, and you can combine it with all the desired state features inside of Puppet itself, alongside more enterprise-grade features like role-based access control, reporting, and compliance. The stuff that Puppet Enterprise has been really, really good at. Automation, this is maybe a philosophical statement that I'll put out here, and you can fact check me later. My position is that automation fundamentally requires trust. If you don't trust the thing if you don't trust the automation that you've built, you're not going to use it. Nobody is going to use it. You're going to be afraid, and if you don't have confidence in the stuff that you've written to be able to actually go out and do stuff on your behalf, well, you're not in a great spot, I think. And that's been part of Puppet's philosophy since the very beginning. That's why, since the very first versions of Puppet, we've always included things like a dry run mode, where you can have Puppet tell you what it's going to do on systems before it does it, because we strongly believe that helps garner trust in the tool. And if you trust the tool more, you will use it more and use it to do more things. The newest manifestation of that philosophy is continuous delivery for Puppet Enterprise, which we've recently released. And what that does is it gives you a pipeline for all of your Puppet code. So this effectively codifies in technology, in a product, something that that our customers and users have been doing for a while now. So the pipeline will send your code all the way from revision control through all the expected pre-flight checks, linting, syntactic analysis, error analysis, things like that, all the way through safely deploying it in a synchronized kind of distributed system safe manner to your Puppet infrastructure so that it can get rolled out and deployed in the right way. You don't have to do that by hand anymore. The tool can do it for you. So to wrap this whole slide up, you can start simply with Bolt, and then when you're ready to scale up and out, well, Puppet Enterprise and continuous delivery for PE are there. OK, so now let's switch gears and talk a little bit about what's new and what I would like to announce today. So the first thing I want to talk about is the release of Bolt 1.0. I'm really excited for this, because if any of you have talked to me or listened to my talks at any point in the last 7 years, I'm a huge fan of kind of the operating model that Bolt presents. The first major feature that is in here that I want to talk about is plans. What plans do, like I said before, is it gives you that ability to sequence all of the operations that you want to do. Basically, it's a way of scripting your infrastructure. Just like you would write a bash script or a Python script or something like that to do something on a single system, I want to extend that power to everyone that deals with systems all day, every day, to be able to address their entire estate. And I want them to be able to do that in a way that can be done totally remotely. So you don't need to have persistent daemons or anything like that running on the remote side. Now, what I know, though, is that there's no shortage of tools that will let you say, OK, I want to do something. I want to do A, and then B, and then C, and then D. I want my linear sequence of stuff. Just go make that happen. I happen to believe, and in talking with a lot of customers, that that is woefully inadequate for any real-world, modern, complicated scenarios. Because it turns out, if you want to do even something really simple, like rolling out an upgrade to some software, or you need to quiesce some systems to make sure you can upgrade parts of your infrastructure safely, that's when you need things like, oh, I don't know, if-then. You need some conditional logic. If this thing looks a certain way, do this. You need error handling. What happens if I try to do a schema migration on some database and it doesn't take? What do? Hopefully the answer is not quit and then page somebody and they have to go in and debug it. Wouldn't it be great if you could actually do some error handling? That would be pretty awesome. Looping. Basic stuff. If you have more than one system, you probably could use maybe a loop to describe all the different things that you want to do. So it isn't rocket science, but surprisingly, I think there's a lot of tools that don't give you that kind of control flow and user experience, which I think is absolutely critical and necessary if you want to get real-world stuff done. The other major feature I want to talk about is Bolt Apply. Now, what Apply does, I'm super excited about this. So what Apply does is that allows you to take a Bolt plan file, and then, I just finished saying you can do this, then that, if this, then, it's a script. But at any point in that script, you can use the apply keyword, and then inside of that block, you can put in Puppet code, like desired state Puppet code, and Bolt will make sure on the remote side that it's enforced as a block, as a unit, just like you would with any other Puppet code. You can reuse modules that already exist. You could reuse all of the Puppet code that you have already written. So now, if you already have desired state that you can use to manipulate the state of a system, you can combine that with the sequential ordering and control flow semantics of a Bolt plan, giving you the best of both worlds. So when I say I want you to use it to script your infrastructure, I'm pretty serious about that. And I think it kind of had to come from us because a general purpose programming language makes it really hard to combine very different evaluation semantics, like do stuff sequentially and then do stuff in a desired state way. We had to control the whole stack in order to be able to do it, which is why I think we're the only people that are able to do this kind of thing. So in summary, download Bolt and check it out. Get your laptop out and actually try it. And I want to talk to you about what you've done by the end of the day. I'm taking notes. Next thing I want to announce is Puppet 6. So this is the latest major version of the Puppet platform. There are a couple of major things in here. There's a ton of minor improvements and maybe features that don't get top billing on a slide, but for those of you who've been tracking the progress through all the community announcement threads and stuff like that, you can get all of that. But a few top-level things I want to discuss. First of all is better secrets management. So we put in a lot of features inside the agent, sort of new aspects to the Puppet type system that effectively makes it so that the agent can run commands at catalog application time, not just at compile time. So what that lets us do is build better integration with things like secret stores so that when an agent actually wakes up and goes to apply a catalog, it can reach out to a secret store like Vault or Conjure directly, get all of the encrypted material that it needs, decrypt it locally, and then go about its day. So a much better, more secure end-to-end encryption story without having kind of the Puppet compilation infrastructure acting as the middleman and potentially causing problems with that clear chain of custody. So that's really awesome and something users have wanted for a really long time, and I'm happy that it's there. The other thing I want to talk about, I'll go out of order a little bit, is the simplified certificate management. So we've revamped how a lot of the command line tooling works for interacting with the certificate authority, which is just good user experience improvements. But perhaps more interesting to me is that now when you create a Puppet certificate authority, it can create a root certificate and an intermediate cert. Or you actually can have a different CA not owned by Puppet at all create the intermediate cert for us, and then Puppet uses that one. So if that makes no sense, it's really valuable if you already have, say, an Active Directory installation, or you already have PKI inside of your infrastructure already, or there's a separate team that manages all that. Now suddenly you don't have to have root certificate level kind of authority and permission to do stuff in your environment. Instead, have them generate you an intermediate with signing authority, put that into Puppet, and you're ready to go. The last thing I want to talk about is now with Puppet 6, you can get the entire open source stack stood up in an entirely containerized way. So you can go on GitHub, and the repo is called Pupperware, because it's containers. I'm not good at naming. But there's right now there's a Docker Compose file in there. With a single command, you can bring the entire stack up. So literally a single command, as long as you have Docker on your system, which is pretty easy to get up and running anyway. The first PR we got was adding Kubernetes support. So now there's a directory with a bunch of Kubernetes YAML files in there that allows you to deploy that onto a Kubernetes cluster. Please take a look at it. Definitely try it out. And then we are very much interested in getting more pull requests from the community to tighten some of that stuff up. Next thing I want to announce is Puppet Enterprise 2019. So there's a few major things in here. Number one is it's built on top of Puppet 6. So everything I just said is inside of all the features as part of the platform are now inside of Puppet Enterprise 2019. The other major things that we do are there's now agentless task execution. So just like all the things I was saying about Bolt that makes it nice, Puppet Enterprise can do that as well. It can remotely go out and talk to systems where those systems don't have a persistent Puppet daemon running on them already. You can remotely install our agents on systems, or you could run a variety of other tasks, whatever you would like. So that's pretty awesome and pretty easy to use, tied in with all of the other kind of enterprise features inside of PE. And then the last thing is task scheduling, which gives people a way of saying, I want to execute this particular task, but I want to defer the execution until a later time to comport with maybe existing maintenance windows or policies that you might have. So rather than, so that's a lot of stuff. And rather than have me maybe talk more and just talk and talk and talk, I would rather show you. So to help kind of demonstrate some of this stuff in action, I'd like to bring up to the stage Yasmin.
Thanks, Deepak. I'm really excited to be here. It feels like it was just yesterday that we were in Australia doing Puppet camps and talking about Bolt's initial release. And I'm super excited to actually demo some of the features in Bolt 1.0. So here I have Bolt installed on my workstation. I happen to be running on a Mac, but it's just as easy to install on both Linux and Windows. And what I've already done is install my, copy over my control repo. And a control repo consists of hire data, a Puppet file, roles and profiles, and any other content that Puppet might need. And primarily, this is used by the Puppet server, but with Bolt, we can use it right from our laptop. One of the new features in Bolt is the inventory file. And this allows us to group all of our targets into logical groupings. So I can have my web nodes, my app nodes. I can set the connection information, so whether I want to connect over SSH, WinRM, local for cloud APIs, or PCP if I'm talking to PE nodes. I can also set the credentials that I want to use Bolt to, that I want Bolt to use to log in as. And Deepak talked a little bit about all the things you can do with Bolt, but sometimes all you want to do is just run a simple command, and it's a great tool for that. So I'm actually going to run an iptables command on my web nodes. And here I can see that I have all the basic firewall rules applied. But I actually want to make an update to add a rule for ingress on port 443. And I'm going to do this with just off-the-shelf Puppet code that I can use as a one-off or for desired state enforcement. So here I have my profile, which has 2 example resources for managing IP tables on both my Linux and Windows firewalls. And in the past, if I actually wanted to test out this change, I'd have to set up a vagrant environment, do some round trips between Git, my Puppet server, my agent. It was a little bit of a headache. But with Bolt, I can do that right from my workstation. And I do that with a Bolt plan. So Bolt plans execute procedurally and allow me to do sophisticated orchestration across my infrastructure. Plans support running commands, scripts, tasks, uploading files, or just taking blocks of Puppet code and applying them. And because these things happen in order, I know that it'll happen exactly how I want it to. So my first step is to actually prepare those nodes and gather facts. And then I'm going to apply that profile that I had over both SSH and WinRM. And lastly, I'll run a command to check my work and make sure what I did is correct. So let me go ahead and run that plan. And just like that, I made the changes. So I want to take a step back and talk about what we did. Took some code that I already used with Puppet, and I applied it to remote nodes without setting up a server, without installing agents to connect in, and signing any certificates. I just did it right from my workstation. And that update turned out nice, but I actually want to deploy that out to the rest of my nodes. So I'm going to commit that code. And I'll do a git push. And so even though I know this change happened successfully on my remote nodes, before I actually deploy it out to production, I'd love to know what impact it could have on my resources before making the change. Luckily, we have a new product for that, and I'd like to introduce Carl to do a demo. Nice one.
Thanks, Yasmin. So I am really excited today to talk to you about continuous delivery for Puppet Enterprise 2.0. This is a product that we launched the first version of a few months ago, and since then we've really hit the ground running. I've been able to talk to a lot of you and learn about your challenges in delivering infrastructure change and having confidence in doing so, and all of the things that go into being able to do that well. In response to all the conversations that I've had with you, I'm happy to announce 3 new features that we're launching with 2.0 that is available today. The first is impact analysis, and I'm really excited about this one. This is a big deal to me, and I think it's going to be a big deal to a lot of you as well. Impact analysis allows you to take code that you have committed into version control but not merged into your mainline Puppet code base and assess the impact that that code is going to have if you were to merge it in. So that's pretty powerful, right? Now you can suggest a change, a proposed change, or take a proposed change from another team and have confidence in what infrastructure that's going to impact. I'll come back to that a little bit more. The second feature that we're announcing is pre-built jobs. And talking with a lot of you, when you try continuous delivery for Puppet Enterprise, there is a little bit of a blank slate problem. You get the product installed and it's up and running, but now you have to go learn how to actually do a lot of the tests that and what are the best practices in order to validate the code that is good to be able to deploy to your infrastructure. Well, with pre-built jobs, we have those jobs just built in. As soon as you install the product, you have best practices jobs to do parser validation, high-risk syntax validation, RSpec tests if you have them written, and you can populate those into your pipeline within minutes and start doing effective continuous delivery practices soon after you install the product. Finally, we're announcing Docker-based jobs. Docker-based jobs is the capability to run all of your jobs that you have in continuous delivery Puppet Enterprise within a Docker container. One of the challenges that I've heard from a lot of you is that when you install the job hardware within the product, you have to make sure that all of your testing frameworks are in all of the places that that job might run. Well, with Docker-based jobs, all you need is Docker. Just install Docker on all of your job hardware, and any job can run anywhere at any time, greatly simplifying how you manage the product. But what I really want to get back to is impact analysis. So let's take a look at what that's going to look like. Now, you just saw Yasmin write some Puppet code and test it out using bolt apply on a subset of the infrastructure to make sure that it works the way that she was expecting. But what we need to know now is what other infrastructure could that potentially impact. So let's go ahead and do a pull request to import it into our mainline Puppet code base. Puppet pull request. Okay. All right, so we have our pull request. And if I go into it, I'll make this window a little bigger for you. All right, we can see that actually the continuous delivery for Puppet Enterprise has already kicked off. We have an impact analysis running here, and we have some continuous integration tests running as well. So let's go take a look at it. We can see the events have already started. So this is continuous delivery for Puppet Enterprise. And on the left, you can see the series of events that have come in against our pipeline. And on the right, you can see the pipeline that we're running. So we have some validation tests. We have once over spec. And now we have this impact analysis. So this is doing an impact analysis on the pull request that is just pulled in. And now that it is done, we can actually click into it and see that this change that is proposed will affect these 4 nodes on our infrastructure, and we can even dive into the resources and see what resources on the systems will be affected. Now, this is exactly the change that we were expecting, so we're not expecting any kind of unintended consequences if we were to merge this pull request. So we feel like this is pretty safe. All right, we can see our pipeline has finished here. What's happened is, because this pipeline was triggered by a pull request, it hits this pull request gate and therefore stops the pipeline. It says this is where the pipeline is going to end for this run because it was triggered by a pull request. And then go back and update the pull request with the results. And we can see that all of the checks have passed. Everything looks good. We can even dive in and see exactly what was done. We're good to go. So let's go ahead and merge this. All right. Great. So that's all done. And if we go back to our pipeline, we have our new events come in. and we can see that the pipeline is running again. Now this time, because it was triggered by a merge, by a commit, it's going to pass through the pull request gate and go automatically into this deployment. This deployment is automated because we have this auto promote here. If we turn that auto promote off, we could just as easily have this be a manual promotion into the production environment. So we have this deployment in place, and it is happening right now. We can go and watch it happen. Behind the scenes, what continuous delivery for Puppet Enterprise does is it abstracts away all of the Git branching, all of the code manager deploys, all of the node group creation and siphoning off nodes from your production environment into the rolling and deployment for you, and be able to manage all of the orchestrator runs behind the scenes. You don't think about that anymore. You just hand it off to Continuous Delivery for Puppet Enterprise, and it manages all that complexity for you. You can do rolling deployments now with a push of a button, and even automate it, as you've seen here. So our pipeline is done. We've deployed this out. And if we go back to our pipeline, we can see that it is all green, all finished, and we have successfully pushed this change out into our mainline Puppet code base, and it is applied everywhere in our infrastructure. That's all I have. If you have more questions about it, or have any questions about it, feel free to talk to me. I can talk about this all day long. All right, back to you, Deepak.
Dun, 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 dun. Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Yasmin. So, like Tim said, I think of the first talk, okay, maybe first of all, Bolt 1.0, Puppet 6, PE 2019, and continuous delivery for PE 2.0, all available now. So Tim spoke a little bit earlier, and we don't need to rehash it, about just the blurred lines increasingly between applications and infrastructure, and the transformation that's been brought about by containerization. And I think, I would only re-emphasize that by saying that these architectures are fundamentally different, and that has a lot of practical consequences on those of us that build systems for a living. A lot of the problems are the same, but the tool chains and the platforms that you use can be very, very different in a containerized or cloud-native world. Instead of dealing with application packages, an RPM or a deb as an example, you now are dealing with container artifacts. Instead of ultimately deploying things onto a set of physical machines, virtual machines, systems with longer lived life cycles, you're now deploying those container artifacts onto container orchestrators like Kubernetes. Those changes filter all the way back up to workflows, where instead of doing just continuous integration, where I need to build an application package, now you need a container-savvy continuous delivery pipeline that takes you all the way from building your containers, testing them, all the way to ultimately deploying them on an orchestrator, because it's all APIs under the hood, so you need to have higher-level tooling that smooths over the interaction with all those APIs. So to talk a little bit more about that, I would like to bring back up Carl.
All right, thank you very much. Whoops, there we go. All right, so today I want to tell you a story about the Puppet Forge. The Forge is an application that we've had for a long time here at Puppet, and historically we have deployed that into a node-centric model. And we've deployed this to IaaS resources, more recently, and we've used, more static environments that you're more, traditionally familiar with, so development, staging, and production. And although the deployments of that have been highly automated, some of those steps are still manual, and the result of that is that new development environments, new environments in general, aren't really created very often. That means that when a change is proposed, when we're developing a new change to the Forge, what would happen is a developer would either have to pull down that change locally and spin up a local development environment, or create a new virtual environment that didn't quite look like production, which of course caused problems. And so in response to that, what we've done over the last year is start moving the Forge away from that node-centric model into a cloud-native container-based application deployed on Kubernetes. And this has really given us an opportunity to not only rethink how we package the application, but how we actually build and the application itself, and of course, how we deploy it. That's where Helm comes in. Helm is a really powerful tool for Kubernetes that allows you to package up all of the Kubernetes resources that go into managing and operating your application into a single artifact that is shareable, repeatable, and upgradable. Helm can not only help you deploy out your application to any Kubernetes cluster, but can also help you manage the life cycle, the upgrade cycle, when you're ready to push out a new change. And we have now been able to incorporate Helm into Puppet pipelines for containers, and we're using that with the Forge to be able to deploy it out and manage it. So what I want to show you here is we have this pull request, and if I go into it, we can see the files that we're going to change here. And basically, we're updating the copy on the main page to talk about the Puppet Enterprise to 2019. And if we go over to our pipeline, well, what we can see here is the pipeline for the entire Forge project. So at the top of the pipeline, we have all of our build steps. We're going to build the new container. We're going to upload it to Puppet Container Registry, which is our container registry tool. And then we're going to build a new Helm chart if necessary. In this case, it is. And then once that build step is done, we're going to use Helm to deploy it out to an environment, for a deployment that is specific to this pull request, which means that we can very quickly take any change, deploy just that one change out to a non-production system that is on a production cluster, therefore as close to production as possible, and be able to test and develop on that change in a safe way. Now, in Puppet Pipelines for Containers, you can have a single project and have as many microservices within here. So you can add as many containers as you want, as many Helm charts as you want in order to deploy out and manage that application as a whole and have independent pipelines for each different service. All right, so we've got this deployment happening, and if we can see it is done. And if we go in here, we can select out this, and you'll notice that this is, there we go. You'll notice that this is a PR-specific URL. So this is a deployment that is just for this pull request change. And we can see here that this is the change that we want. So now we know that we can safely merge this in and use pipelines for containers to deploy it out to production. And that deployment will happen the same way that it's happened to this environment. So that's all I have. If you do have any questions for it, let me know. Thank you.
Nicely done. Thank you again, Carl. So bringing it all together. Hopefully you get that as part of the theme. So again, as Carl said, we got Pipelines for Containers 3.3, Helm chart support, which he just demoed. It's good stuff. You should absolutely try it out. The last challenge that I listed out of the 4 was around measurement. And here, what I would simply like to say is that you cannot improve what you don't measure. I feel that that's pretty basic. So if you've ever been through any sort of reorg or been subjected to kind of new development processes, or you tried to do that stuff yourself, sometimes you think, is any of this stuff actually working? Why did we do this in the first place? Was this all based on fashion? Did we cargo cult this because my CEO read something in a magazine somewhere and now we all have to do software a particular way? But does any of that actually work? There's just so much kind of theory, I guess, out there about how software should be built, which is interesting because fundamentally the business is about ones and zeros. But once you bring humans into it, it gets a little interesting. So the way to cut through a lot of this is with data. So clearly we've put a lot of effort over however many years dealing with assembling the State of DevOps report. But at the end of the day, this is really hard for engineering leaders and IT leaders to figure out. The reason why it's hard is not because they lack the data. You have information in all of these systems that you have throughout your infrastructure. Source control systems, continuous integration systems, build, test, deploy systems, things like that. But they're all kind of isolated, and the data isn't normalized. So it's really hard to connect all of the dots to come up with a coherent story that's how well are we actually doing. I think we can do better. So we did. So I would like to announce a new product called Puppet Insights. So what Puppet Insights does is it's an attempt to actually connect all of those dots together for you. And we do this with the data that you already have, regardless of which vendor the data comes from. There's no shortage of companies that want to sell you the one integrated stack and they could do analytics on only their stuff, because that's the only stuff they understand. I don't think that's particularly useful. Not in 2018, because chances are you have a heterogeneous set of vendors and tools that you use to actually get your job done. Therefore, we should probably meet you where you are and get the data out of the places you already have it. So we can extract information from things like GitHub, if you use Puppet Pipelines or Jenkins or Travis CI, other sources of data, and we're going to be continuing to add onto that and improve that over time. And this isn't just dashboards, because charts are pretty easy, but data science is kind of hard. We need to take all of that data, we need to normalize it so that we can give you a consistent view of how everything is going, even though under the hood there might be different tools and technologies involved in making that happen. So what Puppet Insights does is a couple of things at a really high level. First, it gives you velocity, quality, and other scores that I'm going to show you. And then we can also give you evidence-based recommendations on how to improve. We've done all of this research inside of the State of DevOps report that kind of gives people guidance based on a ton of evidence that we've assembled on here are kind of things you can do in order to move forward and make improvements in this particular area. So now we can correlate that with genuine data to give you something that's hopefully more meaningful. And then, we'll be adding over time things like benchmarking how you are doing relative to other companies in a similar industry, as well as letting you do custom reporting and things like that. So rather than talk about it more, let me show you what I've been talking about. So this is the landing screen for Puppet Insights. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but at the top you can kind of see some high-level data points, around like what we think velocity means, which I'll talk about in a second. There's no shortage of what I think are meaningless definitions of velocity that don't actually relate to anything useful. We like to think that we have a better point of view there. Things like quality, which is more an assessment of kind of bugs and failed deployments and things like that. And then over time, what we'd like to add is actually correlating this to business impact, like actual return on investment for the business. So if we scroll down a little bit, what we can see here is, OK, so if we look at one metric of interest, deployment lead time. So this is a key component of velocity as defined by the State of DevOps report. Deployment lead time is a big deal. And that's how long it takes for you to get a commit from you've written it and you've merged it all the way to now it's been deployed in the field. So it's advantageous to shrink that. But we can see here, as we were assembling the demo and running this against our own internal team stuff, that our lead time increased by like 73%. So that's kind of interesting. One of the things that we can do right now is we can give kind of recommendations for, here's some ideas on how to improve things. Right now, these all come from the State of DevOps report, but again, over time, we plan on having those be correlated more with the data. So what's actually going on here? Well, we can look and see what the actual software delivery pipelines look like. So this is a simple pipeline, so you can just see a couple of stages, code, build, deploy. But build stats looks kind of interesting because the average build time looks like it's gone up a reasonable amount. What's going on there? Well, I have an entire organization worth of data in here. So how do I triangulate where exactly the stuff is coming from? Well, if I look down here, I can start to see here are the different teams and the different projects. And I could start actually trying to look through more what exactly is going on. So if I click on this, I can now look at velocity, but team over team. So this is average deployment lead time, which was that top level metric that looked a little fishy. And we can see on here that this one team, container engineering for Puppet pipelines, something has gone a little sideways in recent time. Maybe they didn't know about it. Maybe there's a perfectly good reason for it, but now easy to triangulate and figure out what's going on. So from there, we can kind of go down here, which is the average build time. So build time is a component of the total deployment lead time, right? And it looks like you can tell over time, steadily, builds have just been taking longer for the team. They're probably just doing more stuff, so it's taking longer to actually build it. So the good news is that while we were going through putting all of this together, we had a chance to speak to the container engineering team, and they already know what's going on now because we were able to point the data at them. And they've already undergone work to start doing things like building more slim containers for their build environment so that they can reduce that number. And we can come back here and track it and see like how the actual impact has been to see if it actually worked out well or if it didn't. So that's Puppet Insights. All right. So again, hopefully you get the idea that we don't want to just give you some random dashboards associated with kind of meaningful artificial metrics, but instead we want to come up with a way that actually pulls the data out of the places that matter and try to correlate it with something that genuinely means something impactful and meaningful for you. Okay, so this has been a bit of a whirlwind tour, I think. And we talked about a lot of stuff. So all of us that were presenting on stage today, we're going to be around the entire rest of the day to talk a little bit more. If you have any questions, please come up and bother me about it. That's my job. Like, I love talking to people about it, especially if you're using it. So thank you so much. And none of this would really be possible. I've been at Puppet for long enough. I've been CTO for a number of years, and I've been hacking on Puppet for longer than that, and a member of the Puppet community for even longer than I've been an employee. So I very much know and viscerally appreciate how none of this is really possible without the input that we get from the user community, our customers, and just everyone that's involved. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great rest of the event. Thank you.